Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux coming to you from Capitol Hill. We are here on the second day of Democracy Spring. The message that these protesters are saying today is that they want to get the corrupting influence of money out of politics. We're now joined by Derek Cressman. He's one of the protesters who was actually arrested yesterday in that massive sit-in. More than 400 people arrested, Derek. Can you just talk about what happened actually after you were arrested and loaded on that bus?
Well, it was a great experience. People's spirits were high. The police were very professional and courteous. They zip-tied our arms, so it was a little bit uncomfortable. But they just took us on a bus and took us about a mile away and processed us, which took a while. But then they just issued us tickets and a $50 ticket. And after about 4 or 5 hours, we were released.
So you never had to be in a cell or a holding pen or anything like that?
No, it was not a scary experience. We weren't put in cells. The Capitol Police are really used to dealing with political protests, and it was an experience that I think most people would feel very comfortable doing.
Great. And Derek, I know you were also involved in helping select the 4 bills that people here are pushing for Congress to pass. Can we just talk about those 4 specific bills and why them specifically?
Sure. Well, one of the key demands is to pass a constitutional amendment that would overturn the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United and allow for mandatory and equal limits on campaign spending and campaign contributions. In the meantime, there's legislation in Congress right now that would enhance the role of small donors by matching small contributions with public funds so that grassroots candidates for Congress could compete with the super PACs until we can put limits on those super PACs. There's legislation in Congress to shine a light on the dark money that has come about both before and after the Citizens United ruling. And finally, Congress needs to act immediately to restore the damage to the Voting Rights Act that was done by the Roberts Court when they gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And we've already seen voter suppression laws sweep across the country as a result of that. So there are lots of things we need to do to fix democracy, but those are the key demands of this march that we want to see Congress take action on right now.
And let's just get more specific. So Section 5, what did it exactly do, and why is that so important for it to be restored?
Yeah, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act required states that had a history of voter suppression through Jim Crow laws going back hundreds of years when they made changes in their election laws to clear those with the federal government. So, for example, Arizona was once one of those states, and they made recent changes to their election laws that resulted in many fewer polling places in this primary, and some people had to wait in line 4 or 5 hours to vote in Arizona. That would not have happened when Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was in full effect, and that's why we need to restore that to make sure that everybody has an equal and fair opportunity to cast a vote and have that vote counted.
So some folks will look at this demonstration and certainly say that, hey, this is a step in a positive direction, but look at folks like Bernie Sanders, who's operating in the current system and still able to get quite a lot of money. We're talking about $27 on average, small donations, but he's fundraising. His fundraising has been really historical. So is there really a need to go about this type of change if you could just maybe inject more energy into grassroots movements?
Yeah, it's exciting and encouraging to see what Senator Sanders has been able to do in terms of small donors in his campaign, but we're not seeing that in campaigns for Congress. And I think the reality is that ordinary people can only afford to contribute to a few campaigns each year. They can't contribute to a presidential campaign, a U.S. Senate campaign, a congressional campaign, state legislative campaigns. You know, we just can't keep pace with the millionaires and billionaires. So we're finding a few occasions where people are coming together, but what we need to do is make sure that every election and every candidate is funding their race through small donors, not just the one exception to that rule.
All right, Derek, thank you so much for talking with
All right.
us. I know you're going to be up there on that stage later on today, and we'll certainly catch up with you later on.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. So we are continuing our coverage, as I said, of this 5-day sit-ins here on Capitol Hill. We are going to have speeches that we're going to be bringing to you. There are going to be marchers, similar to yesterday, going to the steps of Capitol Hill, risking arrest. Certainly the numbers here today aren't as large as they were yesterday, but as I said earlier, 400 people were arrested yesterday, and it's very possible that we'll see hundreds of people potentially be arrested today as well. I want to bring in another protester, Bo King. Bo, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jessica.
So, Bo, you actually came all the way from Albuquerque, New Mexico to be here.
I did.
Can you discuss why it was so important for you to join this movement?
I want to preface this by saying my voice is out from yelling, so apologies. I came all the way down here because 2 years ago, Princeton found that we were more of an oligarchy than a democracy. I'm here because it's the unspoken secret that money is the oil for the machine, and it's very rare in our lifetimes where we have a silver bullet for an issue, and this seems to be the one. Anything that annoys you or frustrates you about politics probably has its roots in the corruption of money in politics. Anything you can think of can be traced back to that almost. And we recognize that, and we want to attack that, and we're doing it in a responsible manner.
So essentially, if I'm understanding correctly, it's that you can't even get other issues addressed in Congress because of the influence of money in politics. So you have to really deal with this root problem of reforming campaign finance. Is that right?
That's precisely right. If you have a virus, do you want a doctor that treats the symptoms, or do you want a doctor that treats the virus itself? And so we are the latter. I mean, what's the point of putting in new representatives in our legislature if the system that incentivizes them to accept legal bribes, if it's still in place, we're just jumping through the hoops for nothing.
Bo, you were also arrested yesterday.
I was, yeah.
Can you talk a bit about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I realize you guys in the media didn't really get a chance to see us. Basically, at the point we got arrested, I first want to say that the officers were amazing. They were unexpectedly sweet and unexpectedly understanding, and it really took me back. I got to chat with many of them. There's an understanding that we are going to not present a threat to them, and we're not going to make their jobs hard, and they have a job to do. So
I remember you guys even chanting, "Police are the 99%."
Absolutely they are. Look at their paychecks. They won't tell you, but they're just like our paychecks. They suffer from the same systemic corruption that we do. Unfortunately, their occupation is to be the enforcers for that, and we recognize we recognize that they're stuck in that too. So we're here. We're a voice for them. If they joined us here, they could possibly lose our jobs. I talked to a lot of sympathetic officers yesterday. So yeah, I was super impressed. So what happened is they took us and they put us into some large buses, and the buses were well accommodated and very comfortable. They took us down to a warehouse, a small warehouse. They set up 3 large sections of chairs, and they were prepared for us. They had a lot of officers there who were ready to process us. They went as quickly as possible, and to their credit, we had contacted them and let them know that there'd be approximately 200 arrests, and the unofficial count from the officer I spoke to about an hour ago, he said 430. So they had the accommodations for 200. They were understandably overwhelmed, more than twice what they expected. So they had the opportunity and the potential to get testy and get angry with us, and they didn't. And so that speaks a lot to their integrity.
Okay, so now it's day 2. Are you risking arrest again today?
Not today. I need to get some sleep. My voice is dying. I'm going to risk arrest tomorrow, though. We're trying to strategically plan second arrest because the repercussions of being arrested escalate per arrest. And so while there's some of us who are okay with the second escalation, which is spending a night in jail, we want to be smart about how we utilize that. So what we're trying to do is we're hoping a lot of people will want to be arrested today for the first time, and then we want to combine with them for multiple second arrests tomorrow. I believe we are marching for the environment tomorrow. So that's sort of an inside baseball behind the scenes kind of thing.
Got it. I was going to say, so second arrest, night in jail. What about third arrest?
I wasn't told that. So when we got arrested, it's basically a catch and release, and they charge us $50, and that was it. And then they said if you get arrested again, you will spend the night in jail. You will get a court date, and you'll be expected to come back. So that there is severe enough to deter a lot of people, but I'm not one of them. So
I was going to say, Bo, there are folks going to be watching this and wanting to maybe participate, or they're on the fence. Is there a message you would have for those people?
Yes, you are us, we are you. This is what democracy looks like. This is what our founding fathers envisioned, this exact movement, when they put when they put the ability for us to do this in there. This is exactly, if they were alive today, they would be proud of this. And we want you here. We need you here. You need you here. And you're not alone. There's a lot of passionate, loving people here, and we're here for the 99%.
All right, Bo King.
Jessica, thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Appreciate
for being with us. All right, so we are continuing our coverage here on Capitol Hill for Democracy Spring. This is day 2. This is going to run for at least 5 days. Sit-ins being planned. It's going to be nonstop. If you followed us yesterday, you would have seen that there were more than 400 people arrested on the steps of Capitol Hill. It was unprecedented, certainly in our century. Some Capitol Police officers saying that never before in the history have they ever had to arrest that many people in a sit-in for that kind of demonstration. We're joined by another protester for those just joining us here at Democracy Spring. Today it's about elders and why it's so important for elders to be a part of this movement. Hi, I'm Jessica Devereaux.
Jessica, I'm Jean Johnson from Washington, D.C.
Jean, thank you so much for being with us. So Jean, can you just tell us, why are you here today?
I'm here because I want corporate money out of politics. I want to extend voting rights to everyone. It's a precious gift in our democracy, and one person should have one vote count for them. So that's why I've come, and for future generations. These are my grandchildren.
Okay.
Children.
Oh, these are your grandchildren. So you're marching for them today as well?
Yes.
Okay. So in particular, is there an issue that you feel like is not being addressed by Washington, and really campaign financing reform is what's blocking it?
Well, of course, it's overturning Citizens United.
Mm-hmm.
That has to happen in our Supreme Court. And it's happening. I think it'll happen at the state level first. They'll overturn Citizens United, and then the Supreme Court will move.
I see you're wearing armband. Yesterday, folks who were wearing armbands were risking arrest. Are you one of those people today?
Yes.
And have you ever been arrested for civil disobedience?
No, I've been in civil disobedience in the 60s for civil rights, and I have undervalued advocacy for the last 50 years of my life, and I'm making up for it now.
When you say undervalued, what do you mean by that?
In the 60s, it all looked so good. There was women's rights, Peace Corps. I went to Columbia. We marched against the war. There weren't going to be wars. People were going to go in the Peace Corps instead. I got to go and study for a PhD. I just felt like women's rights, civil rights. Vatican II happened in the Catholic Church and brought the church 400 years forward. We used to not be able to say that people have a right to their own religion. And finally, there was religious liberty acknowledged. You cannot force somebody to believe something. It has to be their own faith. So the 60s all looked so good. It was like, I thought, everything's going to go along.
Yeah,
fine.
progress would just continue.
Exactly. That's how I felt. And to my shame, I just dropped the ball. Didn't do anything. Credentialed myself, kept busy myself, and now I see, for these children and grandchildren, what have we come to?
And that's why you're here today, to fight, and like you said, reclaim that voice, that spirit of the 60s, and be out here and risk arrest. That is very, very honorable. Some people would definitely say, to be here. Are you at all afraid? How do you feel?
I am not at all afraid. I think throughout my life, I would always want to do things properly. Propriety was a big deal. And I'm not afraid of anything anymore. Arrest? It's on your resume? What difference does that make?
Yeah. What would your message be to folks who might be watching this? Maybe they're on the fence about joining Democracy Spring, or what would you say to them?
I think for Americans, I would say to don't assume that we are living in a democracy. We have to recapture it. We have to reclaim it, and we have to strengthen it. Don't be passive, but do what you can in your local community to, for better schools, for the homeless, for whatever issues are in your community, start to organize to help each other.
Jean, thank you so much for being with us. Hopefully we'll catch up with you later.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So you just heard several protesters, some risking arrest, others who were arrested yesterday. As we said, this is day 2 of Democracy Spring on Capitol Hill. 430 people were arrested yesterday after staging a sit-in on the Capitol building steps. We also have another protester with us. Hi, I'm Jessica Devereaux.
Hi, I'm Barry Knight.
Barry, nice to meet you. So, Barry, were you arrested yesterday?
No, I was not arrested yesterday. I'm here in support. I don't plan on getting arrested until the Democratic National Convention.
Okay, so you're going to be staging a protest there. Can you be more specific? What about?
About the DNC specifically? Well, real quick, I mean, our elections are auctions now. We have bought elections. We see that the RNC is doing everything in their power to stop Trump, which I'm kind of glad they are. But by the same token, the DNC is doing everything in their power to stop Bernie Sanders. So we basically have two people that represent, I guess, the people rather than the oligarchy or the plutocracy that our governments become. So this is actually a three-way race. This race is not between the Democrats and the Republicans. This race is between the people and the oligarchy, the plutocracy, whatever you want to call them. And unfortunately, the people are divided. You get half the people following Trump, half the people following Bernie, and the other half, yeah, I know that's three halves, are glued to that establishment. They support these corporate-owned parties that have sold their allegiance out to the highest bidder years ago. But I think more and more Americans are waking up to the fact that our government no longer represents us, and that's why we're here at Democracy Spring, to change. Because unless we reclaim our democracy, we're going to continue to operate as a plutocracy.
Yeah, and I'll just add that Pew has had many polls on this issue. Democrats and Republicans both poll over 80% that this is a major issue for them, campaign finance reform and the influence of money in politics. So this certainly goes across the aisle.
It does. It is not a partisan issue by any stretch of the imagination. This is an American issue. I just want to add that Princeton University, Ivy League school, these geniuses, these scholars at Princeton did a study a few years ago, and they wanted to determine exactly what type of government exists in the United States. And what they discovered was that America is not a democracy. By all definitions, America has become a plutocracy. Unfortunately, many Americans are still asleep and haven't woken up to that. And I hope Democracy Spring goes a long way into waking up people that are still in their slumber thinking, okay, I'm going to vote for either an R or a D and they're going to represent me. Yeah, we go to the ballot box every 4 years and we cast our vote with somebody for an R or a D after their name, and as soon as they get into office, what do? They forget their allegiance they have to the people that elected them and sell their allegiance off to the highest bidder, be it Goldman Sachs, Monsanto, Walmart, you name it. But that's who owns and operates this country, our multinational corporations.
Barry, there are 4 bills that Democracy Spring is asking Congress to pass.
Yes.
Are you familiar with those bills?
Well, one of them, we have to get a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and get rid of the McCutcheon versus the FEC as well. I mean, Citizens United said, okay, corporations are people. You know, I won't believe that until we see one of those corporations executed. But McCutcheon took the cap on what these people could donate. So now we have unlimited amounts of money where nobody knows where it's coming from, going into these super PACs and funding these elections. Those aren't elections, those are auctions. We have to have one person, one vote. It's that simple.
Okay, and what about this idea, because it looks like you're a Bernie Sanders supporter. I see 2 pins here. And he's done very well on a grassroots level, being able to galvanize small donors, averaging, I think, about $27 a piece. So folks might say, you know, maybe you need to inject more energy into that aspect of fundraising, grassroots level.
Well, I'm glad he's being able to raise the amount of money he has, and he has a legitimate shot at getting the nomination. By the same token, though, I think we need publicly funded elections, okay, rather than just money, 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 buying elections. Okay, candidates, if you're a candidate for the highest office in the land, great. All the presidential candidates should get equal airtime to be able to deliver their message. But instead, we see our elections devolved into just entertainment value about who has the largest penis or whose wife is not respectable, and it's absolutely absurd. They don't want to talk about the issues. It's a sideshow and a distraction.
So this one of the bills talks about getting donor matches for small donations. Essentially, the government would match individual small donations. Are you for that, or would you prefer just public campaign financing all across the board?
This is my personal opinion. I'd rather have just publicly funded campaigns across the board. I mean, if you're running for a federal office, great. You're going to have X amount of time on the air to deliver your message to the people, and then the people can decide when they go to the ballot box.
Okay, are you going to be here for the next few days?
I'm going to be here at least until the weekend, then I have to go up to New York because, as we all know, there are primaries next Tuesday.
Yes. Okay, Barry, thank you so much for
you.
talking with us. All right. Okay, so we are continuing our coverage here on Capitol Hill for Democracy Spring. I'm Jessica Devereaux here. We're going to be bringing you speeches. We're going to be bringing you some of the march. We'll bring you arrests potentially. There are several, more than several. I've at least heard of dozens of people who'll be risking arrest today. Certainly not the numbers like yesterday. We saw more than 400 people get arrested on the steps of the Capitol building. But we'll certainly have that coverage for you later in the day. This is Jessica Devereaux coming to you from Capitol Hill. We'll see you soon. Hi.
So let's begin with your work on campaign finance, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what you're doing, but also if you could explicate what you have targeted as the mechanisms or the levers of change by which, this reform might be made possible.
Yeah, I think there are three moving parts. And one is the president, the second is Congress, and the third is a part of the Constitution people like to ignore, which is the convention clause in the amending provision. And the work that I'm doing right now with this thing called the Mayday PAC, where Mayday comes from the distress call, Mayday, a Mayday on this democracy, is to build really a super PAC that will engage in the election cycle of 2014 and in 2016 with the ultimate objective of getting a Congress in 2016 committed to fundamental reform. And this project we began by basically hiring a firm a couple years ago to make a calculation. What would it cost to win a Congress committed to fundamental reform? And the most important insight they had was that we had to run a campaign in 2014 that basically terrified Congress by winning in at least 5 seats on this issue in a way that made it clear that if you raised this issue before the American people, they would act on it. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. And we did this Kickstarter campaign to raise $1 million in 30 days, and we crossed that line in 13 days.
Wow.
And now we're in a second campaign, a much more, maybe too much more ambitious campaign of raising $5 million in 30 days. And with that and some matches, we'll have the funds necessary to hire the firms to run these campaigns.
So how would you envision allocating, using this money, deploying this money?
So this is a super PAC. It's an evil super PAC, right? And we're sort of embracing the irony of using a super PAC for the purpose, ultimately, of ending all super PACs. So as a super PAC, we have to act independently of campaigns. So basically, we're going to hire campaign shops, ideally on the in the Democratic side and on the Republican side, that will get into races and run campaigns, run a ground operation if that made sense, basically do whatever makes sense to win. Now, we're eager to begin to push the development of new technologies that bring new people into politics. That's going to be an essential part of winning here. But in the short term, for 2014, the objective is to win. And if we can win in a dramatic way in at least 5 of these seats, then I think we set ourselves up for a much bigger impact in 2016.
And when you say win, that would be supporting candidates who promise, once they get to Congress, to institute public financing of campaigns?
Who have committed to co-sponsor what we call fundamental reform, but all of the things we've pointed to are basically different versions of small dollar public funded campaigns. It's critical, of course, to build the base in the Democratic Party, but even more importantly, we've got to find a way to get Republicans on this side of the fight, because this kind of reform is so fundamental that it cannot happen if it's partisan. If it's partisan, it will be certain to be defeated.
Given that relatively small amount of money that you have compared with the kinds of super PACs that the Koch brothers and others can fund, don't you worry that you know, I mean, the last election cycle was $2.5 billion, that in terms of the percentage of money spent, it's relatively insignificant?
Yeah, so in 2014, we're in 5 races. We hope to have about $2 million in each race. That's a pretty significant amount of money in those races.
Which races?
We haven't announced them yet. We haven't determined them finally yet. It'll be a function of where the numbers sit.
Are these Senate or House?
House.
House.
Mainly House. We're toying with the idea. There are 2 very interesting Senate races. South Dakota, Larry Pressler, who was a Republican but now is running as an independent, and he's famous, of course, because he was the one member of Congress who blew the whistle on the ab scandal. So he's a very interesting candidate to think about supporting. And in New Hampshire, there's a really wonderful Republican who openly embraces public funding, who's running against Scott Brown, and that might be another interesting race to get into at the Senate level. But the main races we've been looking at are at the House level, and so that's a significant amount of money in a House race. And I think what we've seen, for example, in the Eric Cantor surprise, is that if the message is right and it resonates with people in a way that I think this message does.
I ask, what purples, what yellows, what purples murmur, what flames will rise to meet the others? Oh no, okay, oh I got it.
Democracy Spring. I'm so sorry. Democracy Spring. There's so much going on here. There are at least 100 people here. Yesterday we covered one of the largest sit-ins that is completely unprecedented on Capitol Hill. 430 people were arrested on the steps. We have speeches that are going on right now. There's a rally, and eventually there are going to be at least dozens of people that are going to risk arrest here on Capitol Hill. Let's cut to the speeches so you can get a sense of what folks are talking about here at Democracy Spring.
I know the pulse of a living thing. I know the pulse of a living thing. I can feel a season turning in my bones. Every morning I rise to meet the sunlight as it rallies us. Every hour I ask, how shall I grow from this my soil? What yellows, what purples murmur, what sap flows, what flames will rise to meet the others in the garden, in the forest where we now breathe. Oh people, is there anything else to want? Any other desire to consume us than this longing to lift and find ourselves in the daylight, waving victory flags, singing triumph songs? Every day I wake, I want to know, is this the day democracy blossoms?
welcoming Frances Moore LePay, an incredible author and truth teller of our generation, with so much pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This last week of the march, yesterday was the best day of my life. I want to tell you why. Okay, you know Diet for a Small Planet, but I kept asking the next question. I finally got to the biggest question. Why are we creating together a world that none of us as individuals want? Oh, what are we thinking? So I finally figured it out. We big-brained creatures, we don't see the world as it is. We see it through filters, and we have been looking through a faulty filter. It is a filter of lack. It's a filter of lack. We don't see enough of anything, especially we don't trust ourselves. We don't see the goodness in ourselves. And so we end up creating systems that bring out the very worst. What democracy has always meant to me is it is the essence of our best humanity. It is the way that we can meet the three essential needs of our species: the need for connection with one another and the earth, the need for meaning and purpose in our lives, and the need for power, for voice. We die without those three basic needs, and we know so. Democracy is at the core. We need democracy to achieve that. And so we can only achieve this as we unite. And yesterday, the spirit of this march was not just about blaming the people who've corrupted our home. It was the spirit of taking responsibility as citizens. We are stepping up. We are taking responsibility. It is our house, as we said yesterday. It is our democracy. That was the spirit in which we marched. That's why it was the best day of my life. So, this is not a set of events of a couple weeks. This is not a step. It is a big step. It is a big new step. Because I'm 72 years old. I've lived through the 60s. I know, I was part of the war on poverty. I organized for welfare rights. And we had the wind at our backs of the civil rights movement, of the women's movement, certainly the anti-poverty movement and more. And yet we were all in our distinct cause, our passion causes. Today, what is so new and what makes me cry is that we are now creating a canopy of hope over all of our movements. It is a canopy of hope of true democracy, a movement of movements, a movement of movements that cannot be stopped. So we are bringing together all of our issue passions, all generations. Even my granddaughters were saying, "Granny, you really walked 100 miles?" Yes. So we are all generations, and so we are building on all that we have done, and we are moving toward democracy as the essence of what it means to be human. And so, as we do this, we have to learn to rethink fear, as that pounding heart is just telling us that we have to understand that pounding heart as inner applause for all that we are doing. And because the way we change ourselves is doing that which before we believed to be impossible. And that's why yesterday, that's why the walk. Thank you all who organized that walk. It was transformative. And so I would like to just say that as we discover our civil courage together, we can do that which before we believed to be impossible. We know now we can do this. I will end with the words that have hung on my wall since 1975. Hope cannot be said to exist, nor can it be said not to exist, for it is like the roads across the earth. In the beginning, there were no roads, but when many people pass one way, a road is made. Yes. Thank you.
Chance. George, what's your last name?
Ripley. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I've been told by my dear partner that I have welcomed the elders who are in their 50s and 60s.
But there are those who are in their 80s and 90s, so we want to welcome them as well.
Hi, so we are here with George Ripley. George, so many names today. So, George, you are actually risking arrest, and you will be being a part of the sit-in today.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about why campaign finance reform is such an important issue to you?
Well, it's actually, campaign finance reform has been the motivation for a lot of people to join this movement. It's a hot issue. You know, bribery is obviously wrong, and that's what's going on. But if we fix the problems with big money in politics, and we don't fix the rest while we've got this civic power, we're building a huge movement here. And if we let that energy go before we fix the rest of our democracy, we'll still have a broken democracy at the end. So,
And when you say the rest, so people understand, what are we talking about?
we're talking about the gerrymandering thing. There are private interests chiseling away at the foundation of our democracy in every area. Gerrymandering has to do with, you know, districts and perpetuating the incumbencies. Ballot access means who gets on the ballot, and they're always making that harder and harder to do. Ballot initiatives are only possible in 25 states because other states don't have those regulations codified to empower the people. Voter Tuesday is an awkward day for people to get to the ballot box. Why do we vote on, why don't we make that a national holiday? There's a dozen major issues. These computerized voting machines. We should be voting on paper ballots with hand counting. That's what we've done for years, and they do it in Canada. We don't need instant results. We need truthful and honest results, and we need to be able to verify those results, not with proprietary codes in the back, you know, the back trapdoors in the back of these computers that can be manipulated. So we need to build a movement that will cover all of these issues before we let the movement rest. So this movement is, I'm excited because this is 12 years after, 15 years after I came to town to do this. I came with Granny D and helped pave the way for her. But, you know, we're still fighting this fight. Come on now. It's time we win. And then, once we've accomplished this, we can rest a little bit. But every so often, I suggest every 12 years, we come back and we reassess the state of our democracy, because it's always being chiseled away at it by the foundation, at the foundations, by those private interests that don't want the people to be empowered.
Can you be more specific about private interests? Because I think folks hear words like oligarch, plutocracy, things of that nature, and there's not really a face sometimes to place them.
You know, the pollution of our air, the pollution of our rivers. These are the manufacturers and industrialists that are mainly culpable for doing that. They don't want laws that prevent them from externalizing those costs, you know, on the backs of the American people. And so, they're always looking to cut costs. They're always looking to undermine the regulations that we, the people, that are in the benefit of we, the people. And so that's why, you know, the woodlands get cut, clear cut, and the profits from the mining industries, you know, are ripped out with very little return to the people. So the special interests are those that are taking advantage of the commonwealth. Okay, there's a reason Virginia and Massachusetts are called Commonwealth states, because back then they understood that there was such a thing as commonwealth, the wealth that we all owned as the people.
Gotcha. Part of today is also looking at elders and their issues, and they're really at the forefront of these sit-ins today. Why does it matter so much at this time of your life to be a part of a movement like this?
Well, this is my life's work. You know, fixing democracy. You know, we want a world that works for everyone. We want social justice. As a matter of fact, social justice is our central organizing principle. That, you know, you might say that's the flagpole around which we're united. Social justice is labor rights, health care, education, the environment, a healthy environment. Global trade is a social justice issue. So we're trying to build a world that works for everyone. And the way we fix things in America is at the ballot box. We fix things by electing people who represent us. These people up here are not even representative of us. And they're millionaires. They're taking advantage of the system, and they're not being statesmen. They're not representing our interests as a people. And so I'll be working on this until the day I die, and because I want to see a world. I want to live in a democracy someday, and I want to live in a world where social justice is the central organizing principle.
And you're still optimistic about that being a reality one day?
Well, history goes in like a sine wave. It goes up and down. At the end of my life, I want to be I want to have contributed to seeing that on the upstroke,
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. George, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet.
And hopefully we'll catch up with you later in the day.
Good.
All right. So we are going to cut to a speech happening right now. It looks like he's holding some money, and hopefully you guys will be able to catch what's being said.
We can work out an arrangement.
Okay, folks, so we really are going to get marching. And I have to say, this is a very collaborative effort. So we are working it out in the very moment that I'm standing here. But my friend David is going to do a song with Jane. What happened to Jane? Yeah, come on up. Jane's going to help us do this song. It's called We're Marching for Our Grandchildren. And I've been hearing I don't have the tune right, so I'm getting some tune helpers. What's your head? Okay. So once again, the words to the song is we're marching for our grandchildren. And we're marching for all the grandchildren, not our own personal grandchildren, but all the children and grandchildren in the world that are with us today and in the years to come. Ready?
We are marching for our grandchildren. 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 We are marching, marching, we are marching, woo-hoo. We are marching for our grandchildren. We are marching, marching, we are marching, woo. We are marching for our grandchildren. We are marching for democracy. 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 We are marching, marching, we are marching, whoa, we are marching for democracy. We are marching, marching, we are marching, woo, we are marching for democracy. What? We are marching for justice. 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 We are marching, marching, we are marching.
Please start marching. Start. Turn around and start marching.
Go, guys. Let's do this.
Marching. Go. Okay, everybody. Our song leaders will lead, but this is moment to start marching for justice, for democracy, for our children and grandchildren.
Yes, I'm ready. All right, we are back here on Capitol Hill. This is Jessica Devereaux. I'm joined now by Lee Camp. Lee, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So, Lee, you're here as just a private citizen, but you do have a show on RT and all of that. I think for a lot, comedy show, yes, yes. I think for a lot of people, they understand campaign finance and on a macro level. But I want to get in to talk about specifics and how we see it translate in Washington, because you're based here in Washington, D.C. Yeah. How does it actually look like on the ground here?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an endless list of specifics. For example, Elizabeth Warren spoke about how Hillary Clinton backed down on the bankruptcy bill that took away people's right to declare bankruptcy in a lot of instances. And she backed down, even though she said she supported it once she became a senator, she backed down because she was getting a lot of money and continues to get a lot of money from the big banks, Goldman Sachs and all of them. And you see it in the votes. You see it in the votes for Monsanto, the DARK Act, which recently barely lost in the Senate. But the reason there are so many votes for something that does not allow labeling across the country is because Monsanto is funding these people's campaigns. Yeah. And they know that, and they know and sometimes it's just the threat. Sometimes a corporation comes in and says, hey, it's not that we're going to take away a lot of money or give a lot of money, but we're going to give a lot of money to your opponent if you don't back us on this bill, and you are losing your next election. And a lot of these representatives, they're up for election every 2 years. They constantly need money.
Yeah, and people don't realize that. Senators are definitely more established. Representatives every 2 years. You're basically constantly running a campaign.
Yeah, and they say a lot of these politicians have come out and said, well, I spend 70% of my time just getting money, mainly from these corporations, mainly from large interests.
Yeah, dialing for dollars. They have
dialing for dollars.
Yeah, yeah. So there are also 4 pieces of legislation that Democracy Spring is advocating for. I don't know if you're quite familiar with them, but based on what you know in Washington, do you feel like that will actually cause a systemic change that is needed to get money out of politics?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are ways to get this done. Other countries have done it. It is possible to get the majority of money, or at least a lot of it, out of the system so that people could have a real vote, so that our voices matter. An extensive Princeton study, which I don't know if you've talked about too much, but showed that we are an oligarchy. We are ruled by an elite interest, and when the people want something, it doesn't really end up getting pushed through Congress. When the business interest wants something, it largely does get pushed through Congress. And, you know, this is an extensive study by Princeton researchers that shows that we have become an oligarchy. And if there's any time to change the system, it's now. It's now or never.
Are you going to be here all week?
I'm here as much as I can. I do have to create 2 TV shows, so I can't be here every day, but I think these people are amazing. I think it's great that you guys are here. You don't see the mainstream media out here, so the alternative media is picking up the slack.
All right, Lee Camp, thank you so much for being with us. Yeah. All right, so you just heard it here. We are going to be here all week. As a Capitol Hill correspondent on The Real News, honestly, I can say that we are one of the only independent news channels on Capitol Hill, and it's true, you do not see too many folks from the mainstream press here, but as I said before, we will be here throughout the week. There will be a stage sit-in every day this week. Today is Elders Day. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back to you, who knows, we actually might be seeing some people get arrested. This is Jessica Devereaux coming to you from Capitol Hill.
So let's begin with your work on campaign finance, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what you're doing, but also if you could explicate what you have targeted as the mechanisms or the levers of change by which, you know, this reform might be made possible.
Yeah, I think there are 3 moving parts. And one is the president, the second is Congress, and the third is a part of the Constitution people like to ignore, which is the convention clause in the amending provision. And the work that I'm doing right now with this thing called the Mayday PAC, where Mayday comes from the distress call, Mayday, a Mayday on this democracy, is to build really a super PAC that will engage in the election cycle of 2014 and in 2016 with the ultimate objective of getting a Congress in 2016 committed to fundamental reform. And this project, we began by basically hiring a firm a couple years ago to make a calculation. What would it cost to win a Congress committed to fundamental reform? And the most important insight they had was that we had to run a campaign in 2014 that basically terrified Congress by winning in at least 5 seats on this issue in a way that made it clear that if you raised this issue before the American people, they would act on it. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. And we did this Kickstarter campaign to raise $1 million in 30 days, and we crossed that line in 13 days.
Wow.
And now we're in a second campaign, a much more, maybe too much more ambitious campaign of raising $5 million in 30 days. And with that and some matches, we'll have the funds necessary to hire the firms to run these campaigns.
So how would you envision allocating, using this money, deploying this money?
So this is a super PAC. It's an evil super PAC, right? And we're sort of embracing the irony of using a super PAC for the purpose, ultimately, of ending all super PACs. So as a super PAC, we have to act independently of campaigns. So basically, we're going to hire campaign shops, ideally on the in the Democratic side and on the Republican side, that will get into races and run campaigns, run a ground operation if that made sense, basically do whatever makes sense to win. Now, we're eager to begin to push the development of new technologies that bring new people into politics. That's going to be an essential part of winning here. But in the short term, for 2014, the objective is to win. And if we can win in a dramatic way in at least 5 of these seats, then I think we set ourselves up for a much bigger impact in 2016.
And when you say win, that would be supporting candidates who promise, once they get to Congress, to institute public financing of campaigns?
Who have committed to co-sponsor what we call fundamental reform, but all of the things we've pointed to are basically different versions of small dollar public funded campaigns. It's critical, of course, to build the base in the Democratic Party, but even more importantly, we've got to find a way to get Republicans on this side of the fight, because this kind of reform is so fundamental that it cannot happen if it's partisan. If it's partisan, it will be certain to be defeated.
Given that relatively small amount of money that you have compared with the kinds of super PACs that the Koch brothers and others can fund, don't you worry that you know, I mean, the last election cycle was $2.5 billion, that in terms of the percentage of money spent, it's relatively insignificant?
Yeah, so in 2014, we're in 5 races. We hope to have about $2 million in each race. That's a pretty significant amount of money in those races.
Which races?
We haven't announced them yet. We haven't determined them finally yet. It'll be a function of where the numbers sit.
Are these Senate or House?
House.
House.
Mainly House. We're toying with the idea. There are 2 very interesting Senate races. South Dakota, Larry Pressler, who was a Republican but now is running as an independent, and he's famous, of course, because he was the one member of Congress who blew the whistle on the ab scam scandal. So he's a very interesting candidate to think about supporting. And in New Hampshire, there's a really wonderful Republican who openly embraces public funding, who's running against Scott Brown, and that might be another interesting race to get into at the Senate level. But the main races we've been looking at are at the House level, and so that's a significant amount of money in a House race. And I think what we've seen, for example, in the Eric Cantor surprise, is that if the message is right and it resonates with people in a way that I think this message does, it's not actually going to take a lot of money to begin to line up people on the right side of this issue.
How do you handle candidates like Barack Obama, who did talk about public financing in 2008, along with many other issues, including closing Guantanamo and revisiting NAFTA, et cetera, rolling back the egregious violations of civil liberties under Bush. And then once he got into office, these turned out to be, essentially lies, public relations gimmicks in order to win an election. But he had no intention, we know, because he immediately brought in Larry Summers and others. How do you deal with the fact that so often in an election cycle, because of the polling, because they take the pulse of the American public, because they're very good at feeding back to us what they know we want to hear, that as soon as they get into Congress, they do the bidding of corporate lobbyists?
Yeah, maybe that's what would happen. But I don't see the alternative to electing people who have committed to a pretty simple task. I mean, simple in the sense it's clear whether they do it or not. I'm not talking about people committing to voting for something. They're committing to co-sponsoring something. So that's about sending a letter on the first day to the sponsor of a bill and say, please join me to your bill. And if we can build a majority in the House and a supermajority in the Senate who've committed to this kind of reform, then I think we have a real shot of pushing it. Now, obviously, 5 races in 2014 isn't going to create the political movement to do it. But we believe that if we can demonstrate why this issue is so salient, and we can show how we've moved the dial in an election, then when we get to 2016, there'll be a lot of people, both small dollar contributors and big dollar contributors, who are interested in trying to support the effort to finally get this change through a Congress. Because I think what both sides are increasingly recognizing is that the way we fund elections can't help but corrupt their own side against what they want. I mean, you know, we on the left see that in 1,000 contexts. But what's interesting, in particular, again, about the Eric Cantor fight is that the thing that was so powerful in what Bratt was saying against Eric Cantor is that he'd become a crony capitalist. He'd be, given in to the crony capitalists. Now, I don't like Eric Cantor's politics, but the idea that Eric Cantor becomes a crony capitalist has got to be the clearest testimony to the fact that money is an impossible force to resist inside of the current system. And if both sides begin to say, look, we just can't get what we want so long as this is the lever of control inside the system, we might begin to build the kind of cross-partisan support this will take.
Let's look at the debate over the public option, because we had significant numbers in the House. I believe around 60. The Black Caucus supported it. We had Bernie Sanders support it. Dennis Kucinich, when he was in the House, was very outspoken in support of it. And yet, through the caucus hearings, they managed to utterly silence what would have been a rational discussion of health care by bringing up the public option. And the corporate state used very heavy-handed tactics to turn all of these people who had co-sponsored this legislation, who had, I don't know if they got it out of committee, but who had supported the public option, so that even Bernie Sanders and finally Dennis Kucinich supported Obamacare and didn't fight for it. How do you envision confronting that monolith?
Yeah, I mean, the public option is a perfect example of the way in which the threat of money is enough to stop a party from pushing for something. Because they basically said, we're going to defeat the Democratic majority if you don't give us relief on the public option. I think the difference with that, though, and the issue that we're pushing here is that though it's perfectly clear that if we change the way you fund elections, it would radically weaken the power of lobbyists and these types of interests inside of Washington, it's a hard thing to rally those interests against, right? For example, think about the climate change debate, which, I'm as committed to the idea of the need for climate change legislation as anybody. But I also believe there's actually 2 sides to the debate, not the science debate. There's not 2 sides to that debate. But as you go into a district, one side can stand up and say, yeah, I get the climate problem, but we have jobs. There are people who need jobs. And you start doing this, you'll destroy the economy. And that creates 2 sides to the debate, whether there should be or not. That produces it. But on this issue, it's hard to imagine what the other side of the debate says. It's important the Koch brothers or the Soros, George Soros has this extraordinary influence in our political system. I mean, what do people say? Now, we know that sometimes people think something turns out to be completely idiotic, but they think, it's a good thing that the rich people have all this power because they're the smart people. That's totally ridiculous in its way in which it plays out. But anyway, they think that. But you can't say that. You can't run ads that sort of that say that in any direct way. So I actually think it's not that it's an impossible thing to fight, but it's a fight which is strongly on this side. So yeah, there's going to be an enormous battle necessary to ultimately win this, because when K Street recognizes that 40% of the value of K Street is going to disappear if this type of reform gets passed, they're going to fight it like hell, which is why we've got to find a way to build the biggest army possible of people saying, finally, let's get this done so we can get back to what ordinary politics is supposed to be. You get your gang and I get my gang, and we figure out who gets the most votes.
Well, they'll fight it the way they always fight it, which is to lie. They'll swift vote you. I mean, they will miss, as they did with the public option. Death panels, you can't choose your own doctor, and they have such a huge megaphone that they can create false perceptions. That's what they're quite skillful at.
Yeah, they will do all that. But I don't think we have the option to just sit back and say, okay, so therefore let's not try it. We got to try it. We got to step up and do whatever the hell we can, because the consequences of not fixing this problem are too great. There isn't a single problem you and I care about, or a single problem that people on the right care about, that can be addressed sensibly so long as we have the system. So, you know, we might lose. You know, it might be likely that we're going to lose, but that's no excuse for not doing absolutely everything we can to try.
How do you handle the courts, which have, especially at the Supreme Court, become wholly owned subsidiaries of corporate power?
Actually, the kinds of reform that we're pushing are totally fine, even with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been, you know, activist in striking down reforms that try to silence people. And they have this ridiculous decision where a public funding statute basically put more money into a race if private money was being spent on the other side. And the court struck that down, which was, you know, just a ridiculous interpretation of the First Amendment. But even that court has consistently affirmed the idea that you can create basically public funding schemes. And this public funding scheme is the least problematic, because rather than, you know, the model of, for example, presidential public funding, where the government decides how much money people get to run their campaigns, this is give every voter the power to facilitate public funding by either matching their small dollar contributions or giving them a voucher they can use to support small dollar candidates. Those are completely constitutional, even with this Supreme Court. Now, they could make up a whole new, you know, theory, but I actually don't think that's what they would do. I think that as long as it were voluntary, at least in the way it was structured, they would uphold this.
And how would public financing look to you of campaigns?
So in my ideal vision of public financing, you basically give every voter a voucher, and you say candidates can take those vouchers if they agree to take only those vouchers, plus maybe small contributions of up to $100. So in my book, I described a $50 voucher. You know, and $50 per voter is $7 billion, which is about 3 times the amount raised and spent in the last congressional election. So it's real money, but the critical thing is it's real money that's spread out across all the voters. Because in my view, the central problem to the current system is that we have outsourced the funding of campaigns to the tiniest fraction of the 1%. You know, it's basically 150,000 Americans who are the relevant funders of campaigns. Right. It's the same number of people as are named Lester in the United States. So the Lesters basically are the funders of campaigns. But funding the campaign is an essential step on the way to getting elected, right? So we've created this 2-stage election where this tiny, tiny fraction determines the first stage, which then gets you to the second stage. So, you know, unlike the, you know, very much like the white primary in the Old South, we've created a green primary in the new America. But the difference between the white primary is in the white primary, at least the majority got to vote. In the green primary, it's the tiniest, tiniest fraction of the 1% that get to vote. So the only way to address that problem, in my view, is to find a way to spread out the funder influence. So it's no longer the tiniest fraction of the 1%. It's the vast majority, or, you know, maybe it's 20% or 40% that are the relevant funders of campaigns. And the way to do that is to facilitate this kind of funding that a wider range of Americans participate in.
And one would assume that eventually the goal is to abolish super PACs altogether.
Yeah, and by super PACs, I mean that very precisely. I don't have any problem with independent political action committees so long as contributions to them are limited, right? So, if AARP or Planned Parenthood or the ACLU or the NRA wants to get their members to support an independent political action committee, that's democracy in my view. The corrupting dynamic that's been produced now, though, is that because they can take unlimited contributions, they've become the kind of laundering device for candidates who, for rich people, and also now corporations who want to participate in the political process. Because, the thing that most of us, at least I certainly missed after Citizens United, was that Citizens United just created or according to the court, affirmed the right of corporations and unions to spend whatever they want in political elections. But it turned out corporations, like rich people after Buckley, were pretty shy. There was a high cost to free speech, as Target found when it supported an anti-gay candidate for governor in Minnesota. So they don't actually use the right to spend their own money. It was only after the DC Circuit created the super PAC by saying that limits on independent political action committees also had to be abolished, that they began to give their money to the Independent Political Action Committee, so that the Independent Political Action Committee becomes, the super PAC becomes the device that engages in political action. And because of the really outrageous transparency rules which the FEC has imposed here, corporations can now give their money to a C4, this nonprofit entity, and the C4 can give its money to the super PAC, and you have no idea who's actually giving the money to the super PAC. So dark money has risen dramatically in 2012. It'll be much higher in 2014. And that's because of the structure of the super PAC. So yes, eliminates super PACs in the sense of entities that can take unlimited contributions, but there's no problem with independent political action committees or any entity that can take small contributions as a way to facilitate democratic organization.
Welcome everyone back to the Real News Network. I'm Jared Ball here in Baltimore. During a recent interview for the alternative media daily news hour Democracy Now!, longtime activist, scholar, and icon Angela Davis spoke some about the recent visit to Cuba by President Barack Obama. Specifically, Davis noted the absence of media coverage of that trip focused on Cuba's acceptance and protection of Assata Shakur, the former Black Panther Party political prisoner who escaped U.S. custody in 1979 and eventually made her way to Cuba. Here is some of what Davis had to say in that interview.
I've been involved in the campaign to save Assata's life for all of those decades. And now, of course, as there are new openings with respect to Cuba, we welcome the end of the embargo, the blockade. But at the same time, we have to be attentive to what this might mean for Assata.
Now, while many on the left may appreciate the inclusion of this coverage and at least some discussion of Assata Shakur and political prisoners, our next guest says that there are problems associated with the approach often taken by those discussing these and related issues, problems exemplified in that Angela Davis Democracy Now! Interview. Dhoruba bin Wahad is a former member of the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, and was himself a political prisoner for nearly 2 decades as a result. He joins us once again from Atlanta. Dhoruba, welcome back to The Real News.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for having me on the program.
So in a recent Facebook post, Dhoruba, you said the following, quote, Angela Davis's appearance on Democracy Now! And Goodman's representation here is somewhat opportunistically playing on Hollywood's fabrications and current events highlighting the U.S.-Cuba normalization process, rather than an accurate assessment of Assata's past, Black Panther Party, and Black Liberation Army involvement. Democracy Now! Selects commentators on My Comrade's history that legitimize its status as alternative media while abetting this stealth history of armed Black radicalism. Dhoruba, Welcome, everyone, back to the Real News Network. I'm Jared Ball here in Baltimore. Early on Monday morning, the Islamic State recaptured Al-Rai, a northern town along Syria's border. This occurs a few days after losing it to rebel forces and militant allies, including al-Qaeda's branch in Syria, the al-Nusra Front. As ISIS continues to make gains in Syria and in Iraq, our next guest, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, is here to unpack the origin of so-called extremist organizations like the Islamic State and al-Qaeda. Larry Wilkerson is joining us from Falls Church, Virginia. He is the former Chief of Staff for U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell and currently an adjunct professor at the College of William and Mary. He is also a regular contributor to the Real News Network. Welcome back to the Real News, Colonel Wilkerson.
Thanks for having me, and I'm actually on campus at William & Mary today.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for joining us from there. Can you talk to us a little bit about the origin of the Islamic State and as an al-Qaeda affiliate? When and why did they split? How do their strategies ultimately differ? And anything else that you wanted to elaborate on as far as the origins of these organizations?
I think I'll take exception to the tone with which you started, if you don't mind, and say that I believe ISIS Daesh is being pretty roundly defeated, and that this tactical victory you just suggested is just sort of like a hiccup. I do think they're being routed in Syria, and they're going to be routed in Iraq too. Big question right now is whether we push them out of Raqqa first or we push them out of Mosul first, the latter city having a lot more difficulties in the aftermath of that than the former. So I hope we decide on Raqqa. Not only is that an important city, but it's also sort of identified with ISIS and al-Baghdadi in particular. But to get to your point about the origins, I think it's important that we realize that people like Jason Burke in his new book, The New Threat, and Joby Warwick in his book, The Black Flags, The Rise of ISIS, have put their finger on not only the origins of ISIS, Warwick in particular and specifically, but also on what it means for the rest of us, particularly those of us in the West. And what it means in essence, although this is much more complex than what I'm going to say here, this is nonetheless at the heart of it. ISIS and ISIS-like terrorism is not going away anytime soon. It's not an existential threat. It does not warrant the money and time and effort, bombs, bullets, and bayonets we've spent on it to this point. That said, and put aside for a moment, it is a threat that's going to be around for a while, just as I think terrorism will be around, as it has been around for a long, long time. And so managing it at a level that's more or less acceptable, I guess you would say, is going to be a dominant mission for some time to come. And because of that, you need to understand where this all comes from. And as I said, Warwick and Burke, even more so, seem to do that in their books. They remind me of a briefing that I got from a very talented woman from the CIA at the very beginning of our response, if you will, post 9/11. This was sometime in late September, and she briefed us on Al-Qaeda. And she used a diagram that was quite definitive in my view. It showed how there were some 100 million plus Muslims at the bottom and Al-Qaeda at the top of more or less a pyramid. And it indicated how there was sympathy amongst those 100 plus million and even funding in some cases for what was happening or what was represented by the top, in this case, Al-Qaeda, as I indicated. Kind of counterintuitive because Al-Qaeda means the base, but they were actually at the peak of this pyramid. And until you deal with the sympathies, the sentiment, the ideas, the feeling of deprivation, impoverishment, and powerlessness that's at the bottom of that pyramid and that provides sentiment and funding often for what's at the top, you're never going to get this problem into a manageable condition. So understanding where these people come from, understanding why the Maldives, for example, south of India, are supplying fighters for ISIS in Syria, understanding why Cyrenaica in Libya is providing fighters, understanding why lots of countries in the world, particularly Muslim communities that have this sort of feeling of impoverishment and disempowerment and so forth, understanding what they mean for this and what that bigger base means in terms of support and doing something about that.
So we know
development assistance, through economic assistance and so forth, through good governance and other things than bombs, bullets, and bayonets is key to bringing this down to a level where it's manageable and we don't see a Brussels or we don't see a Paris or worse, a 9/11 or the Bali bombings in Australia or against the Australians and the bombings in Spain and so forth.
But Colonel Wilkerson, some of this base of support that you talk about or that you just mentioned certainly exists in response as a critique to Western foreign policy, including U.S. foreign policy. You know, we know Al Qaeda was formed in the 1980s after Afghanistan defeated the Russian army. And we know that that ISIS was inspired by the reinvasion of Iraq in 2003. What do you see, or what maybe are in these books that you're mentioning is being said about U.S. and Western foreign policy and prospects for it being changed, leading to as an impetus for change in the reactions of these communities?
Well, unless you hold with the position that U.S. foreign policy created all these conditions of impoverishment and disempowerment in the world, I think it's hard to make a connection directly. But there is a connection with policies that are unbalanced and perceived to be so by the Muslim world, like our policy with regard to the Palestinians and with regard to Israel. We have now become Israel's lawyer, Israel's great power supporter. We no longer question that relationship. That's wrong. That does create problems. Like the FBI agent said in response to the 9/11 Commission query from Lee Hamilton, can you tell us why they did this? And he, screwed up and said, well, U.S. position towards the Israeli-Palestinian issue might be an issue here. We don't want to admit that, but it is. That said, if the United States ended its support for dictatorships in the region tomorrow morning, if it became suddenly an honest broker in the Israel-Palestine situation, if all the foreign policy imperfections were worked out in the next 48 hours, we would still have this problem. And I think that's one of the big points in particularly Jason Burke's book about the new threat that makes sense. And that is that there are lots of people in the world between the ages of 18 and, say, 27, 28, who have absolutely no prospects. No prospects for a job, no prospects for a family, no prospects for any kind of meaningful employment of their time post they're getting out of, even in some cases, university. Until you take care of this highly charged, testosterone-filled group of people who are being cut off in terms of the future, you're going to have a recruitable base for this kind of terrorism.
Well, Colonel Wilkerson, thank you very much for joining us here at The Real News and helping us at least approach an understanding of the origins of these organizations. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me on, and good day to you.
Thanks to you for joining us wherever you are, and for all involved. I'm Jared Ball again here in Baltimore, saying as always, as Fred Hampton used to say, to you we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and we'll catch you in the whirlwind.
I'm Eddie Conway. Welcome to The Real News. I'm down here in the Gilmore Homes Project, and a group of concerned citizens and some positive organizations have decided to build a recreation center down here for the young people in Gilmore Homes and surrounding areas to be able to have some place where they can play, they can learn, they can develop some skills that will help them in their life. And they have started working on this building here to turn it into a community center.
It's pretty nice around here. Since Freddie Gregg passed away, it got much better now. And people start to realize that life is short. So try to work with each other, start trying to get over one another. It'll be a good thing, you know? Yeah, gas warfare against somebody.
We don't need the.
But, all right. Let's see.
Some little girl was living in here, loving Beyonce.
I don't have a handy phone in my bag. So I think that's what this is filling in a hole. It's not in bad shape, really, the place.
I mostly was passing to make sure it wasn't occupied. You know what I'm saying?
And to note the fact that this is the area where Freddie Gray grew up was and supposedly killed by Baltimore City Police Department. Matter of fact, we can pan to the area. Everybody's lives matter, especially our children, which are our future. Until next time, get involved. Good stuff, though.
What we're doing today is moving soil so that you can have so that we can have a nice garden up here and grow some vegetables. They started one last year, but it was the end of the growing season and nothing really was happening there. But so in this lot here next to the house, there's going to be a nice garden. So.
Oh, watch it. Back up. Yeah, back up some. I right there. How we did that shit when we had moved it.
And we just want to be an example of people who not just talk about what we can do, but just really put in the work, the real footwork. So I really get a lot of satisfaction. To some people, this is just a garden for vegetables. To us, it's making a more broader statement that us as us black people need to come together, really start taking charge of our communities, and really start, rebuilding these vacant houses. We can really turn them into learning centers and good places for our kids to become more conscious and go to places other than rec centers where they can learn. So I really get a lot of satisfaction out of being a part of this.
Getting tired of this bullshit. Every day, but it happened every single day, and I'm the one to be out here to see it, man. I record it every time it happens. Every time I see it, I'm out here. Like, I take this cop watching for real, like for real, and they know my name. They know me. You feel me? Ever since I filmed Freddie Gray, they know exactly who I am. You feel me? And I'm gonna keep the pressure on them because it seems like that's the only thing that's working.
They book you for.
and badge number? John Cena. Can I get your name and badge number? Can I get some names and badge numbers? Oh, you know me. Can I get some names and badge numbers? Oh, all right. Now everybody want to leave. Don't nobody want to say. Can I get your name and badge number? 627? All right, appreciate it.
I'm helping Mr. Warren do this, and
It's for the community center, or?
yes, try to keep it clean.
I don't like this place.
Why?
Cause they kill around here. They kill people around here. Yes, they do.
You hear me, Kara? You see me too? Okay, we out here on Presbyterian Mount, and Kara is directing the camera. You're doing a good job, Kara.
Water. Yeah. In that jug. Yeah, that's water. Look. I'm making something. Hello. Hey, no. No.
We're like from Baltimore City in the house that's been abandoned. And we're joined Harry Tubman. Alright, Harriet Tubman made the Underground Railroad. She got free and went back to free other black people from slavery, and that's all.
Welcome everyone back to the Real News Network. I'm Jared Ball here in Baltimore. 7 million lead water pipes nationwide, calls for massive replacement of that infrastructure, combined with the legacies of labeling mostly black and poor neighborhoods as blighted, or as signifying a justifiable impending and forced removal of those populations, has led our next guest to suggest that this water pipe crisis will be turned into just the disaster capitalist event necessary to legitimize those previously arrived at conclusions. Glenn Ford, executive editor and founder of Black Agenda Report, is back with us to discuss all of this for his Ford Report. Glenn, welcome back to the Real News.
Thanks for having a place for me.
So please lay it out for us. How is this national lead water pipe crisis going to be used by disaster capitalism?
Yeah, I think this is going to creep up on us. You know, when people first learned about the lead poisoning in Flint, Michigan, folks were all upset, righteously, about the criminality of the state and the federal officials involved. And they were horrified by the sheer scale of the threat, the public health threat that looms. And it looms not just over Flint, but over communities all around the country. According to USA Today, about 2,000 city and county water systems are infected with lead. And the problem is most acute in the older cities and in older housing, even in cities that aren't that old, because that's where the pipes are more likely to be made out of lead. And that, of course, is where disproportionately black people live. In Chicago, for example, up until the 1980s, they had a housing code that mandated that lead be used in the pipes. Washington, D.C., and I'm sure you're familiar with this, Jared, spent almost $400 million trying to replace pipes, and then stopped doing that when the job was only half done because they said it was too expensive. And we know that there are lots of cities, and most of them are heavily black and poor, that already have higher levels of lead than Flint, Michigan does. So clearly, the United States is facing a horrific public health crisis, and this health crisis must be addressed. But it also means that the perfect conditions have been created for disaster capitalists. And these disaster capitalists not only want to privatize the water systems all over the country, they've only got 12% ownership of water systems in the US, so that means there's 88% to go. That's a huge growth market as far as they're concerned. They not only want to do this big privatization cash in, but they want to move Black people and poor people out of potentially profitable urban real estate. And this presents them with a perfect opportunity. They want to use this lead poisoning crisis to privatize the water, but also to remove Black people from the cities. It's estimated that it would cost $1 trillion to replace the lead pipes in the country. That's $1,000 billion. So unless the federal government picks up the whole tab for replacing these pipes, then the states like Michigan, but a whole lot of them, they're going to use this disaster to sell off the water systems, and they'll say that that's in order to pay for the pipes. And the cities, of course, which are starved for cash under all circumstances, they'll be under the same pressures. But we have to understand that in most localities, the government only pays for replacement of the pipes up to the boundary of the private property. And after that, either the homeowner or the landlord has to pay for replacing the pipes. In low-income areas, that means a mandatory replacement of pipes rule would cause homeowners to go bankrupt, and it would also prompt landlords to try to pass on the cost of the pipe replacement to their tenants through raising the rents. Cities and counties will use this health emergency to declare a blight on these poor and Black communities. And they've already been doing that, in fact, for decades, really for generations, saying that poor communities were blighted and then forcing the people to leave. Only now, with this national lead crisis, we see this scenario developing all around the country. So the only possible way to prevent this national health emergency from turning into a Black removal project all across the country is for the federal government to pick up the tab, this $1 trillion tab, to fix it. If we leave it to the states and the cities, it's going to be a demographic disaster for us.
It sounds like some of the critiques I heard a couple of years ago around the effort led, I believe, by Van Jones to move towards a greening of the economy and eco-capitalism, as if this would in and of itself take care of all the problems undergirding these surface manifestations. But as Public Enemy once said famously, and I hear you repeating now, Glenn, don't believe the hype.
You know, they can turn any, not just disaster, but any good cause into a very bad result for us. And that's why we have to, you know, we're always urged to become more sophisticated. But I think that sophistication means that we have to study the movements and motives of capital and understand that they can create a situation when even a campaign for a public health good cause reason can be turned into a Black removal excuse.
Well, Glenn Ford, thanks again for joining us here at the Real News Network.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us wherever you are. Again, I'm Jared Ball here in Baltimore, saying, as Fred Hampton used to say, to you we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and we'll catch you in the whirlwind.
So let's begin with your work on campaign finance, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what you're doing, but also if you could explicate what you have targeted as the mechanisms or the levers of change by which, you know, this reform might be made possible.
Yeah, I think there are three moving parts. And one is the president, the second is Congress, and the third is a part of the Constitution people like to ignore, which is the convention clause in the amending provision. And the work that I'm doing right now with this thing called the Mayday PAC, where Mayday comes from the distress call, Mayday, a Mayday on this democracy, is to build really a super PAC that will engage in the election cycle of 2014 and in 2016 with the ultimate objective of getting a Congress in 2016 committed to fundamental reform. And this project we began by basically hiring a firm a couple years ago to make a calculation. What would it cost to win a Congress committed to fundamental reform? And the most important insight they had was that we had to run a campaign in 2014 that basically terrified Congress by winning in at least 5 seats on this issue in a way that made it clear that if you raised this issue before the American people, they would act on it. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. And we did this Kickstarter campaign to raise $1 million in 30 days, and we crossed that line in 13 days. And now we're in a second campaign, a much more, maybe too much more ambitious campaign of raising $5 million in 30 days. And with that and some matches, we'll have the funds necessary to hire the firms to run these campaigns.
So how would you envision allocating, using this money, deploying this money?
So this is a super PAC. It's an evil super PAC, right? And we're sort of embracing the irony of using a super PAC for the purpose, ultimately, of ending all super PACs. So as a super PAC, we have to act independently of campaigns. So basically, we're going to hire campaign shops, ideally on the in the Democratic side and on the Republican side, that will get into races and run campaigns, run a ground operation if that made sense, basically do whatever makes sense to win. Now, we're eager to begin to push the development of new technologies that bring new people into politics. That's going to be an essential part of winning here. But in the short term, for 2014, the objective is to win. And if we can win in a dramatic way in at least 5 of these seats, then I think we set ourselves up for a much bigger impact in 2016.
And when you say win, that would be supporting candidates who promise, once they get to Congress, to institute public financing of campaigns?
Who have committed to co-sponsor what we call fundamental reform, but all of the things we've pointed to are basically different versions of small dollar public funded campaigns. It's critical, of course, to build the base in the Democratic Party, but even more importantly, we've got to find a way to get Republicans on this side of the fight, because this kind of reform is so fundamental that it cannot happen if it's partisan. If it's partisan, it will be certain to be defeated.
Given that relatively small amount of money that you have compared with the kinds of super PACs that the Koch brothers and others can fund, don't you worry that you know, I mean, the last election cycle was $2.5 billion, that in terms of the percentage of money spent, it's relatively insignificant?
Yeah, so in 2014, we're in 5 races. We hope to have about $2 million in each race. That's a pretty significant amount of money in those races.
Which races?
We haven't announced them yet. We haven't determined them finally yet. It'll be a function of where the numbers sit.
Are these Senate or House?
House.
House.
Mainly House. We're toying with the idea. There are 2 very interesting Senate races. South Dakota, Larry Pressler, who was a Republican but now is running as an independent, and he's famous, of course, because he was the one member of Congress who blew the whistle on the ab scam scandal. So he's a very interesting candidate to think about supporting. And in New Hampshire, there's a really wonderful Republican who openly embraces public funding, who's running against Scott Brown, and that might be another interesting race to get into at the Senate level. But the main races we've been looking at are at the House level, and so that's a significant amount of money in a House race. And I think what we've seen, for example, in the Eric Cantor surprise, is that if the message is right and it resonates with people in a way that I think this message does, it's not actually going to take a lot of money to begin to line up people on the right side of this issue.
How do you handle candidates like Barack Obama, who did talk about public financing in 2008, along with many other issues, including closing Guantanamo and revisiting NAFTA, et cetera, rolling back the egregious violations of civil liberties under Bush. And then once he got into office, these turned out to be, essentially lies, public relations gimmicks in order to win an election. But he had no intention, we know, because he immediately brought in Larry Summers and others. How do you deal with the fact that so often in an election cycle, because of the polling, because they take the pulse of the American public, because they're very good at feeding back to us what they know we want to hear, that as soon as they get into Congress, they do the bidding of corporate lobbyists?
Yeah, maybe that's what would happen. But I don't see the alternative to electing people who have committed to a pretty simple task. I mean, simple in the sense it's clear whether they do it or not. I'm not talking about people committing to voting for something. They're committing to co-sponsoring something. So that's about sending a letter on the first day to the sponsor of a bill and say, please join me to your bill. And if we can build a majority in the House and a supermajority in the Senate who've committed to this kind of reform, then I think we have a real shot of pushing it. Now, obviously, 5 races in 2014 isn't going to create the political movement to do it. But we believe that if we can demonstrate why this issue is so salient, and we can show how we've moved the dial in an election, then when we get to 2016, there'll be a lot of people, both small dollar contributors and big dollar contributors, who are interested in trying to support the effort to finally get this change through a Congress. Because I think what both sides are increasingly recognizing is that the way we fund elections can't help but corrupt their own side against what they want. I mean, you know, we on the left see that in 1,000 contexts. But what's interesting, in particular, again, about the Eric Cantor fight is that the thing that was so powerful in what Bratt was saying against Eric Cantor is that he'd become a crony capitalist. He'd be, given in to the crony capitalists. Now, I don't like Eric Cantor's politics, but the idea that Eric Cantor becomes a crony capitalist has got to be the clearest testimony to the fact that money is an impossible force to resist inside of the current system. And if both sides begin to say, look, we just can't get what we want so long as this is the lever of control inside the system, we might begin to build the kind of cross-partisan support this will take.
Let's look at I'm Jessica Devereaux coming to you live from Capitol Hill, where the Democracy Spring is taking place. This is a series of actions that are taking place all week here on the Capitol. We have folks coming from all over the country who are saying that they are sick and tired of seeing the corrupting influence of money in politics. I'm joined now by Beverly Brady, who came all the way from California to be here. Beverly, can you just explain why is this issue so important to you that you journeyed all the way from California to be here on Capitol Hill?
Well, besides the fact that I have a couple of grandchildren and I'd like to see a future for them, we have such a corrupt government now, and it really is so disheartening to see the money that has destroyed. It's like legalized bribery. Pure and simply, this is criminal behavior. Democracy has absolutely no chance of happening any longer. And we have the climate we have to fix, we have health issues, education, and now, unfortunately, we have to go to this extent to come out. We have corporate news, which doesn't give us the information that we need. The situation is dire, and that's why I'm here.
I understand. And yesterday you actually were arrested. So you described some of this feeling that we are experiencing today, reminiscent of your activism days in the 60s as well. Can you speak about that a little bit?
During the 60s, we were fortunate enough in the end, but took a long time. It took 7 years before we really got some traction. But when we did, we had the news behind us. We had real journalism. more real than not. And but we had journalists who would tell us what was happening, and they had body bags coming home shown on the television, which we don't have now. In fact, we're in worse condition now than we were then. We had a chance to have our voices heard in the 60s. We don't now.
But you are making your voice heard today.
Yes.
And this is Elders Day, and as there are going to be themes each day. So as someone
who's
80. Who's 80 years old, 80 years old, and you're still fighting the fight, what message do you have for those who might be watching today and on the fence about joining?
I think if you can't stand up now when our planet and our environment is on the edge of annihilation, and we as a species are threatened. And if we can't stand up now, when are we going to stand up? We don't have enough time left, Jessica. We are in such grave danger, you know that. And a lot of people do, but they think somebody else is going to do it, or they're turned off because they think they can't get someone elected who will help them. And it's really disheartening, but I have to stand up. We just can't lay down. You know, what's the point?
Yeah.
You know, what can I leave my grandchildren? Money is not going to do it. We need to have air, good air to breathe. We need water. We need health care. We need education. But we need a planet for them to live on.
All right, Beverly Brady, thank you so much for talking with us.
And you know what I want to say? I want to say I love the Real News.
Oh, wow.
You guys are so great. You inform people.
Thank you for watching.
Your interviews are absolutely incredible. You interview the people who need to be heard, scientists, artists, well-informed people who care about this environment and our world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica.
Thank you, Beverly.
Oh, my.
All right. So that was Beverly Brady, one of the protesters who was actually arrested here yesterday. 430 other people were arrested here on Capitol Hill. I spoke to some Capitol Police. They were saying this is historical, unprecedented, certainly in our centuries. They were saying maybe even in history. So really big development happening. As you can probably see, we haven't begun to see, or maybe we have begun to see some folks getting arrested now, but they are making a stand, as you see, seated there as they did yesterday before the Capitol building on the steps, but they've actually moved closer to the Senate side of the Capitol. So most likely all those folks that you see there are going to be arrested today. We also have another guest. Hi there, Jessica Devereaux. Holly, correct?
Holly Mosher, yes.
Holly Mosher. Holly, you're a filmmaker,
yes,
is that correct?
I'm a filmmaker. I produced two films, one called Free for All, and that's about elections getting stolen, which is happening again here. You know, what's happening in Arizona is a disgrace, and with voter ID. And then we made another film about money in politics called Paid to Play.
Paid to Play. Okay, so for folks who haven't seen that film, what's the premise?
So we follow the corrupting influence of money in politics, like starting on the campaign trail. And when somebody runs for office, right now it's cost prohibitive to run for office. You have to take a year off, and they spend 75% of their time fundraising, not learning about issues, talking to regular voters, just phone, call time.
Dialing for dollars.
Yeah, dialing for dollars. So, we also follow how this happened the last 40 years, like since the Powell memos. Lewis Powell, who became a Supreme Court justice, and how he did a call to the corporations saying, you guys are losing, you've got to get back in the game, and how they've infiltrated with think tanks, getting into the education system, and, influencing politicians with,
Can we go back to this Powell memo? Because I think a lot of folks don't know about this. When did it actually happen?
1971, and just before he was put into the Supreme Court by Nixon. So it was just under the radar, and they didn't even ask him about it. And it just really is a call to arms. And you've seen in the last 40 years, it's just been implemented. And slowly, it took a long time, but now we're seeing the effects. Especially, people are finally waking up after Citizens United. That was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, it's time to get money out. We feel it. There was even a study called the Gillens and Page study out of Northwestern and Princeton that showed even since 2002 that the politicians listened to the donors almost 99% of the time.
Yeah, because that's often the remarks that you hear from folks who do take campaign contributions from large corporations, not just singling out Hillary Clinton's campaign, but they're all of Democrats and Republicans, both sides. And so what their response oftentimes is that you cannot prove that there's a direct correlation, that I received a campaign contribution and therefore I did the bidding of Wall Street or did the bidding of the fossil fuel industry. You do make that argument, though. How do you guys
It's a systemic problem because it's so ingrained now. I mean, I did another film about pharmaceuticals, and a doctor said, a doctor will be bought for a cup of coffee and not realize it. They think, oh, not I. I'm not going to be bought off for a cup of coffee, but you see it in their prescribing practices. So, whenever somebody gives you something, you feel goodwill towards them and you feel like you owe them. So it's just kind of in our human nature. So we really have to clean it up because everybody will be like, of course, I'm not susceptible, but it's just our broken system. So we actually outlay a 6-part solution to cleaning up money in politics, including public financing, so that regular people can run for office, that they can afford to run for office.
The counterpoint to that always is taxpayers shouldn't be paying politicians' campaigns.
Well, right now we're paying for it in our, bills that are good for we the people, and what we want are not getting through. So what country do you want to live in? One that speaks for us or one that speaks for the donors? So, there's a cost to democracy, just like it takes time. We're here. I walked 3 days with the march. I came in from California. I just feel so strongly about this. Democracy is a verb. We all have to participate. We all have to come out and stand up. But I am happy to say that there's a lot of people inside who also see this problem. Like my own congressman, Ted Lieu, is actually hosting a viewing of Pay to Play so that Congress can see this problem. He was our champion in California with Prop 49, the Overturned Citizens United Act. So I know that a lot of them have their hearts in the right place. They're sick of it. They don't want to spend 75% of their time fundraising. That's not what they signed up for. So, we're here to work with them. We're not here against them. We're here to do this together.
You also said that you had 6 solutions. We got to 1.
Oh, yeah.
What are the other solutions?
I have a little graphic here.
we love visuals here at the Real News.
I
So
also have a money in politics AZ guy.
Okay.
How it influences everything. But we have, public financing, disclosure, gerrymandering, a constitutional amendment, free airtime. Like the public airwaves, there are airwaves, and the media is making money off of the election cycles. And then ending gerrymandering, because right now about half of the states are districted very poorly, very partisan, and it should be about fairness. People, the district should represent the actual voters, not the other way around.
some people will say that's great that you want to work with members of Congress, but truth be told, the current system actually benefits incumbents. If you talk about gerrymandering, for example, why would they actually have a real stake in this if they are benefiting from this?
Well, sometimes they get it. I mean, we've seen on a state-by-state basis, they will sometimes just do what's right. But you do have to push them. It takes, it takes this to make that happen. So, just state by state we'll get there. Like I'm in California and we just passed fair districting a few years ago, so we were able to get it through even though it was benefiting.
Can you just lay out what fair districting actually does?
Well, it would make the boundary lines much more accurate. Like right now they'll create like these weird geographic patterns that are like, they can be like 200 miles long and or they'll just do a slice, to like get minority votes, or like it's really insane if you look at it. So it's, like I said, each district, the district should represent the voters. And you see it in certain states where, like I'm from Wisconsin originally, and there, it's about half-half, but you'll see that we have far more representatives in Congress who are Republicans, even though it's just, about equal. So that's when you really see it, and that's when you get a Congress that's tied up.
Okay, I guess, I'm probably very ignorant on this issue. What does fair districting look like? Is it that you just create rectangles?
It depends, like county lines, but you can have what it really means is an independent panel, not a partisan panel doing the districts. People who just don't have that agenda. So it's about cleaning it up by fairness, and then, you can look at it mathematically and make it pretty fair, much better. And like I said, half the states are pretty good, but half are very partisan.
You also mentioned a constitutional amendment, and that's one of the demands here. The protesters here today want Congress to pass a constitutional amendment. Some people say that's so unrealistic, you know, that we will never be able to pass a constitutional amendment on this one issue.
Can you vote? Can I vote? People thought that was impossible. We're women. We got the vote. You know, the end of slavery. So what's impossible is tomorrow's possible.
Great. And
in less time. we're not waiting that long. We're here. And 16 states have already had their legislatures call to overturn Citizens United just in 6 years. So we're making amazing progress. And in Montana and Colorado, they had it on the ballot, and it passes with over 70%. So, and that's a nonpartisan issue. Washington State's going to vote on it in November, I-735. The people are going to vote this November. And hopefully California. I'm helping with SB 254 work its way through Congress in California so that we can vote on it in California this November along with Washington. And that's the one that my congressperson Ted Lieu had originally sponsored, but we got sued off the ballot, and then the California Supreme Court said we could have it on the ballot. So we'll be hopefully back on the ballot this November with working with our Congress members.
Well, I wish you luck on that initiative and all of that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so a pleasure to
Nice to
meet you, Holly.
Thank you for coming out, because it's really disheartening to see the mainstream media not covering this. And I'm really grateful that you are here and bringing this to people.
Real News for nothing.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Holly. Well, as you just heard, lay out just what specific solutions would be needed in order to change the current status quo. Let's go and take a look at what's happening over there closer to the protests. I believe they already have begun arresting folks. So let's take a closer look.
tell me, because we wasn't even here when I got here. I was going to be said something else. Them and both. Staying all night? I got this tomorrow. But everyone's been saying, so like, it's kind of like the first time I'm going to lose, second time. If it's like this again tomorrow, I'm cool with it.
So if you're just joining us now, we are live here on Capitol Hill. This is Democracy Spring. There are going to be a series of events throughout the week. Essentially, yesterday was one of the largest days of sit-ins. There were more than 400 people arrested on the stairs of the U.S. Capitol yesterday. Today's sit-ins, the theme of today is elders, and elders who are concerned about the growing influence of money in politics. They say that they want to leave future generations a working democracy. We got a chance to speak to a couple of elders here today who are protesting the corrupting influence of money in politics. As you can see, there are probably about 100 or more people here gathered today with signs saying Democracy Spring, overturn Citizens United. As you can hear them right now, they are chanting Democracy Spring. That is the name of this movement. They are calling for 4 bills for Congress to pass. These 4 bills all have to do with campaign finance reform and getting the influence of money out of politics, as well as combating voter suppression laws. They like to limit big money in elections with a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United. That's a Supreme Court decision that essentially equated speech with money and free speech being allowed, unlimited campaign contributions being allowed under the First Amendment. They also would like to encourage and amplify the voices of everyday Americans by getting Congress to pass a bill that would match small dollar donations to political campaigns. There is also a bill that will protect against voting discrimination by restoring the Voting Rights Act. If you remember, back in last year, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was struck down by the Supreme Court. Section 5 essentially made sure that states that were changing their voting laws would have to go through a pre-clearance process by the federal government. These states often had poor records on disenfranchising certain communities, particularly minority communities, African American communities. So without Section 5, they no longer have to adhere to the pre-clearance standard of the Voting Rights Act. There's also an idea to modernize the electoral system with automatic voter registration, and these protesters today would like to ban practices that keep people from the ballot box. They argue that certain laws, like voter ID laws, have suppressed voters, minority voters. They've even said women, because women oftentimes change their names, and therefore for them to prove that their names have been changed, they have to show a birth certificate or marriage license, or oftentimes even a divorce certificate. So they are against voting being harder for folks and are advocating for practices that would actually make it easier for people to vote. They are also calling for a Senate hearing and a vote on the president's nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court. They are not saying that they are in support of Merrick Garland, who President Obama nominated, but they do say that it is Congress's duty to take an up or down vote on whether or not he should take vacant seats, Antonin Scalia, the late justice's seat. So they are calling for Congress to take an up or down vote on his nomination. We have spoken to many people here today. They say that they are willing to risk arrest. As I said earlier, more than 400 people were arrested yesterday as a part of one of the most massive sit-ins here on Capitol Hill. I've heard that in history, not just in the 21st century, but in history, that this is truly unprecedented. But there are also talks of those who were arrested yesterday. They've told me that they're not going to necessarily risk arrest every day, because every time you're arrested, the penalty is harsher and harsher. Upon your second arrest, you basically have to spend a night in jail. The first arrest, these protesters told me that they were given a fine and had to pay a $50 fine. But after that, the penalties escalate. So they are strategically scattering the amount of protesters that get arrested on a daily basis. As you can hear them chanting, "This is what democracy looks like." The name of this movement is Democracy Spring. It started in Philadelphia, about a 9-day trip. They walked all the way from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. with one simple message: they want money out. And they say they want money out of politics. And as you can hear them saying, money out, one vote, one person. So this is quite interesting, because you don't actually see too many folks in the mainstream press here. There are definitely several outlets. Some people don't have mic flags or any identifiers, so it can be a bit tough to tell what media outlets they're representing, but certainly there were more folks out here yesterday, more folks from the media out here. We're going to take you to take a look more closely at what is happening to the protesters who are staging a sit-in right now. As you can probably see, there are a lot of police officers surrounding them, and they will be arresting them individually with those plastic handcuffs. And yesterday there were actually 4 coach buses, because there were hundreds of people here who were arrested.
Great, thank you.
earplugs or something. Amen. Amen. Come on, God bless you. Are you tripping? I'm representing. We're all supposed to be able to represent something. Amen. Amen. I'm glad that you're able to do what you do. Amen. Continue to do what you do. Free speech, amen. Well said, sir. Well, he's not the very first amendment to the United States Constitution. And it works so much better when we have a unified voice. Don't you agree? Come on, unified. Be one, we're one. A kingdom divided shall not stand. A kingdom divided shall not stand. Jesus came into the street. He was able to mix it up with men, women, children, and make a, hey sir, we don't talk sex acts to other men. Real men don't talk sex acts to other men. We will. We're gonna have a something positive. I'm here to preach. Introduce yourself. Lady, look on the back. People's house. The 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 people's house. Our democracy. Our democracy. Our democracy. Our government. Pay attention. Yesterday, people are being the scripture written on the back of the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 29. I believe that we. I believe that we will. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 29. Devise no evil against thy neighbor. I believe that we. I believe that we will. I believe that we will win. 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 All across this country and say, come to DC. Maybe that'll make them go away. It ain't about the money. How could it be about the money? This is about Jesus. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. No, I don't get anything at all other than the blessings that I give away to y'all about you and the rewards of mountains. You asked the question, but there's nothing. Jesus kicked the money changers out of the church, and we should kick them out of Congress. What do you say? All right. Woo! We are unstoppable. We are unstoppable. We are unstoppable. We are unstoppable. Another world is possible. Another world is possible. We are unstoppable. We are unstoppable. We are unstoppable. Another world is possible. 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 Another world is possible. Another world is possible. What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? Democracy. When do we want it? Now. Check. Check.
Do you want to be here, Cam, because the sun? Yeah, I can move it. Okay. Move it closer? Okay. That's right? Okay. Tell us when you're ready. Okay. Kai, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. 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 Thank you.
Okay. I can also training.
Hey. Good to see you. I've been seeing and hearing a lot of you, but I have finally meeting you.
Yes.
So what I'm going to ask you is essentially how you got here. Yes, yes, I hear you.
Thank you for saving it. Your sacrifice will help us win. Hey, hey, over there, democracy is in the air.
All right, this is Jessica Devereaux coming to you on Capitol Hill in the midst of Democracy Spring. I'm joined now by Kai Newkirk. Kai, you are a lead organizer of Democracy Spring. A lot of people watching this might be saying to themselves, how did this all come together? Can you explain?
Well, it's been a long journey. You know, we first had the vision in 99 Rise, one of the convening organizations, October 2014. I was in jail after a small action in New York City. Spoke to one of our organizers, Kurt, and I said, I had this idea last night, inspired by something we did in California, a walk from Los Angeles to Sacramento. 37 days, 480 miles. 12 straight days of sit-ins at the Capitol, small sit-ins.
And same issue, campaign finance reform?
Yes, that was just around big money in politics and corruption. This is around big money in politics and the right to vote. And we got to be clear that this is a bigger fight here. But 2 out of 3 bills we were pushing for there in California were passed. We were kind of the coup de grace that kind of helped push them across the finish line, but inspired a lot of people. And we said, what if we could do that nationally, right? And come to D.C., which is where people feel in their hearts is that's where this fight has to be won, right? Waged and won. And so, you know, when I thought about where you could start a march that would end up in D.C., that would make any sense, you know, the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia just stuck out as the place that's symbolic of our aspirations to democracy and was the right place to begin. And so then, you know, we talked about it in our organization. We knew we couldn't do it, you know, as this small grassroots outfit. You know, we punch above our weight, but we knew we couldn't do something this big. So we started reaching out to other leaders in the movement like Lawrence Lessig and Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks and Zephyr Teachout, and saying, would you be willing to be part of this? Would you be willing to risk arrest if we made this happen? And, you know, they said yes. You know, we would if it's going to be big, right? If you can bring other people to the table. So we took those kind of commitments, right? And other leaders like Umi Sela from the Dream Defenders and Dante Berry from Million Hoodies and Francis Moore-Lapé and so on. And so we were just kind of built from one to the other to show that a lot, you know, that you wouldn't be alone, right? That you would be part of something historic, right? And to say, we're not going to just do this if it's just Kai and 3 of his friends, you know what I'm saying? We're going to do it if we can bring many people together, right? Leaders and many people who are leaders in their communities and grassroots people maybe doing something for the first time.
So this is real grassroots, because there might be some folks watching that being skeptical, being like, there's big money behind this as well.
Very much, very much. I mean, trust me, you talk to most organizers, you know, folks that run organizations and say, would you try to do something this big, this ambitious with the kind of resources that we have? They say, hell no, you know. But we said to ourselves, the only failure right now is not to even try something that could actually make a difference, that could actually break through in a moment of crisis. And so we said we have to dream big. If we fail at that, that's fine, because at least we stepped up to the plate.
Yesterday, 400 people, more than 400 people arrested. So that's a success in your mind.
Absolutely. I mean, the largest civil disobedience that's ever happened at the U.S. Capitol. I mean, that sends a message that people care about this issue in a profound way, and that we're not going to just accept business as usual anymore. And it's been possible because we brought so many leaders together and so many organizations, almost 140 organizations, right, that are part of this, that said we want to help to make this happen. And when we crafted that vision that we felt like would resonate with people, you know, to say, what if we could do the largest civil disobedience of this century, right? Walk from the Liberty Bell to D.C. and we're going to sit in day after day, right? And focus the nation's attention on this issue in a way that's never happened before. Wouldn't you want to be part of that, right? And we felt this will resonate in this moment in our country. But then we had to get that message to people, right? Get the invitation out there, right? And that was about bringing organizations together to send out email blasts, you know, to get real about it. You can, if you reach 100,000 people, 200,000 people, 500,000 people, a few of them are going to be willing, some hundreds or whatever, right, to say, yes, I'll step up, I'll pledge to risk arrest, right? If you can get that message out to enough people, some will step forward and come and commit. And then we had to build a team to call those people on the phone and talk to them and explain it. The vast majority of people sitting in, it's their first time risking arrest, you know, which is, there are many veterans, especially among the elders. But a lot of people are doing it for the first time, which is very inspiring to me, because that builds your leadership when you step up and do something like that for the first time. So, you know, but our team has just, we've had to build it and build it. We have a movement house in Tacoma Park. My dad came up and built a bunch of bunk beds. 21 people, you know, have been staying there and organizing. Some of them are staff that have a modest salary, but the vast majority are volunteering because they care so much. And we said, if we can give you a house, a place to stay, and food to eat, an opportunity to be part of making history, you know, will you do it? And a lot of people said, please, please give me that chance, because people care so much.
What's really sort of struck me is just how diverse this group is in terms of issues. But everyone more or less says, I can't get climate justice reform done. I can't get prison industrial complex reform, all of that stuff, if we don't discuss campaign finance reform. And so I wanted to ask you, you guys have 4 bills in particular that you want Congress to pass. How did you settle on those 4? And talk a bit about that debate.
Well, our demand is a moral demand first, right? It's to say Congress has a responsibility to take immediate action to end this corruption, ensure free and fair elections, and give us an equal voice. And any good faith effort we would accept, right? And say, okay, we'll stop sitting in for now, right? But we also wanted to give direction around what that reform should look like, you know? So we identified 4 bills, and we wanted to make sure that they were bills that would make substantial progress, both on big money in politics and the right to vote. And that they were bills that had some meaningful support already within Congress and within parts of the movement, right? So we could give people a stake in this campaign, right? And to give those who've been working at that a sense that, hey, we're coming together and we're going to push something forward that you've been invested in. And so that it would be very clear that it's a very reasonable demand. I mean, these bills could be moved forward today. You know, they could move on it right now. The vast majority of the American people want them to across the political spectrum. So we wanted to make it impossible for any critic to say, well, you guys don't know what you want, right? You don't know what they should do. You don't have a solution. No, we have steps that are clear that can be taken, and Congress needs to move on them now. And then the 5th step, after Scalia's death, was a vacancy on the Supreme Court that Congress, the Senate in particular, has the power to fill with a justice who will uphold political equality, who will vote and make rulings and cast their vote in decisions to ensure that we end this corruption of big money in politics, protect the right to vote for all. Because the Supreme Court obviously has done so much damage to our democracy in recent years, also has the power to right a lot of that.
But you're not taking a position on the nomination, is that correct?
On Merrick Garland, we don't know enough. We don't think that we can say at this point that we know enough to say that he meets that standard as someone that will defend and uphold political equality as a justice on the Supreme Court. But we want to be clear that it's the constitutional duty of the Senate to give fair consideration to any president's nominee, right? And so they need to have hearings so the American people can learn where he stands on these issues, right? And they have to give ultimately an up or down vote. That's their duty. Now, whether we would support at the end of the day that vote is another question. We need to know more. But there's no doubt that they have to move forward, and it's an outrageous obstruction and disrespect to the office of the president and to our Constitution, to our democracy, to the American people to just say we're not going to do anything.
Kai, I know you're in the middle of actions right now, but I can't help but think about the future. And with all this energy surrounding campaign finance reform, are you guys going to take this fight to a more local level? Essentially, what's the next step?
We're focused on this moment. You know, Occupy Wall Street changed the game for the fight around economic inequality, right? And planted so many seeds, you know what I'm saying? In some ways, what's happening here is one of those, right? But we want to create a moment that shifts the political weather around political inequality and around the crisis in our democracy. And once you do that, when you can draw a line in the sand in the public consciousness and force people to take sides, when you can inspire people and bring it to the front of the attention of millions of people around the country and move people to have a sense of allegiance, either with the movement or those who defend the corrupt status quo, then possibilities of reform at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level are dramatically increased. It's like we're all running around trying to dunk, but the basket's 20 feet up. When a movement shifts the political weather, it changes gravity, and all of a sudden you can jump up and do a tomahawk slam. So what we're trying to do is open up that space. And many people who have come here from all over, I was already saying goodbye to some people today. They were like, did the march from Philadelphia, this was life-changing, this is so powerful, I'm going home, I want to do this, I want to do a march in my state, right? So we know that's going to happen, but it all comes from the spark that happens here, right? So we're calling to people, Colorado, California, Alaska, Hawaii, Florida, wherever you are, come to DC. You still have time. We're going to sit in tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And what we want to do is if we can force this debate into the heart of the election narrative and make people take sides, candidates and members of Congress, then those who side with the people in democracy and against big money and corruption should do better because the people are with us on this issue, right? And there needs to be a political price to pay for those who side with the status quo and refuse to do anything to change it, right? And then there will be a political benefit to those who, in the midst of the spotlight that we're shining on this issue through this unprecedented action, there will be a benefit to those who stand with the people.
So this movement is not necessarily endorsing one candidate over the other, but you're certainly sending a strong message to whomever the Democratic nominee will be.
Any nominee of any party, right? Okay. We're not here to endorse a candidate. We're here to create a situation where every candidate feels like they have to decide whether to endorse the movement, endorse our cause, or not, right? And those who do will do better because the people are with us. And we want to create a situation where anyone who's running for office in this country, whether it's for president on down to city council, has to make a decision where they stand, right? That you can't just be in the middle on this anymore. You're either going to be on the side of the people to save our democracy, or you're going to be with the corrupt status quo. And then those who take that stand, we need to get them out of office.
Wow, some strong words. Kai Newkirk, really a pleasure. Thank you. I hope we can catch up with you later on the week. We're going to be here all week.
Real News Network. We
Yes.
love you.
All right. Thank you. All right. So as you just heard it, that was one of the lead organizers of Democracy Spring. As you can hear people chanting in the background as well, do your job. They are here on Capitol Hill with one message. They want to get the corrupting influence of money out of politics, and they want voting rights to be expanded rather than contracted. So they are fighting voter suppression as well, and that is certainly a part of the message today. We are actually across from where the sit-in is taking place. You should be able to see another angle there. There are folks who are sitting in. Most of them are elders, as you can see, because that is the theme of the day. There are people who are saying we want to leave a better democracy, not a worse off democracy for their children and their grandchildren. So they are sitting in to stand up, as someone has said to me earlier today. So this is what is taking place, not just today, but tomorrow, all the way through Friday. And on the 18th, there will be a Consciousness Day where protesters will be going to members of Congress's offices, and they will be demanding meetings with them. And if they are not given those meetings, they will be staging sit-ins and risking arrest again. Yesterday, more than 400 people arrested, close to 430, I've been told, were arrested for sitting in and forming an act of civil disobedience, and that's what we saw yesterday. Today, certainly a smaller group, but there are folks here supporting them as well, as you can see behind me. So let's take a look at what's happening with the elders there that are sitting in, whether or not Capitol Police is encroaching. Let's take a closer look to find out what the status of those arrests are. right, this is Jessica Devereaux coming to you from Capitol Hill in the midst of Democracy Spring. We've been covering this this is our second day of covering the sit-ins. As you can see, there are a group of elders there who are sitting in protesting the corrupting influence of money in politics, and they also want to protest voter suppression laws. So there is probably about, I'd say, 100 people here. Yesterday there were 400 people who were arrested, more than 400 people arrested on the steps of the Capitol who were staging a sit-in. We are going to be covering this all week. There is a day where it's going to be students. There's a day that is going to be all about climate justice. There's a day where we're going to actually speak to labor organizers, and it's a day all around labor issues. So all week we're going to be coming to you. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, at The Real News. You'll tweet us if you have any questions, anyone you'd like us to speak to, any issues or concerns you may have. We want to hear from you, the viewer. So as I said, all week, Real News holding it down here on Capitol Hill. I'm Jessica Devereaux. Thank you so much for watching.